We're going to go to Brussels, where French President Emmanuel Macron is making some comments. Let's listen in.
Versailles agenda and our response to the American activities on the economic front, and we haven't got much change to report about because we were taken up by the much more important topics such as the electricity reform, and that's as regards the rules of economy and finance. We were also preparing a COP28. Yesterday night we mentioned the multi-annual financial plan, so that after a few years the Commission can get back to us with new proposals corresponding to a more realism in the national priorities for financing. All this having been discussed, I can answer any questions afterwards. Of course, this Council was much more about major crises, and today we have several and are in a serious context. In Ukraine, we reaffirmed our support for the independence of Ukraine and its territorial sovereignty, and the strategic context is still the same. President Zelensky spoke yesterday, and you heard him. We also want to continue to provide our military support in the long term, or medium and long term, which has its budget consequences, and this we'll get back to at the meeting of December. We want to reinforce our military industry in Europe. We want to do this so as to be able to offer better support to Ukraine, and it makes sense in the long run. There were also various points that you might question me about, other topics, but this was the heart of the message. We are still committed to supporting Ukraine. We have the will to bring credible support to Ukraine. We also came back to various points in the region, in particular the Western Balkans. We have the problem of Serbia and Kosovo, and you heard the Prime Minister yesterday and President Vučić, they had a discussion with Meloni and Michel and myself, and on this topic we have clear lines. We want to implement the Brussels Agreement, and we want to see the setting up of a multi-state situation in the region in the years to come. It has to become a reality, and after repeating that we condemn the attacks of the 24th of September, we have asked for clear action from President Vučić. I've also had a talk about Armenia and Azerbaijan. We need to watch this very carefully, and we are continuing with our mediation work between both governments. But our message has to be quite clear that we are supporting Armenia, particularly because its territorial integrity was touched upon, and it means we want to ask Azerbaijan not to impinge on this territorial integrity and to stick to the borders of 91 that were set down in the Prague agreements. So this has to be watched carefully. Then we also mentioned the situation in the Middle East, and we had a long, useful debate where we expressed that we had solidarity with Israel and that we condemned the terrorist attack of Hamas, and we are determined to act for just peace in the Middle East. Of course, in the first instance, we condemn terrorist acts such as Hamas's actions, and we all agree that Israel has a right to defend itself, but within the limits of international and humanitarian law. We are all very committed to see our hostages freed. I talked to Prime Minister Netanyahu and to the Emir of Qatar several times about this question of the hostages, and we have constant contact with the various negotiation teams to this aim. We are all coordinating so that citizens and entitled citizens can leave the Gaza Strip as soon as possible. We want these people to be evacuated, and we are trying to organize their extraction. And we are in touch with Israel, with Egypt, with doing it in consultation with other European countries. And these are the most striking features of the meeting. I reported about my visit, and I laid down the first steps for renewal of the peace negotiations and 3 pillars around which the European countries would like to move ahead. First pillar, anti-terrorism. You can't be within international law and be terrorist, and the terrorist movements of the region are a threat for there, but also for us. We have to be clear about terrorism, including vis-à-vis Iraq and Jordan. The region and our international partners are walking the same line together. We've lost around 30 French citizens in the terrorist attack. The will that we are expressing with this initiative is to show that you're not alone against terrorism. The answer to terrorism is not a massive action which endangers civilians. It's a targeted retaliation, and it's something operational between armies. And we, in our past efforts against terrorism, we've learned some lessons, and I would like us to have an initiative where we all combine our information. We've fought against Daesh. We could use our experience to combat terrorism in the Middle East. Second aspect, second pillar, the humanitarian aid. Of course, Israel wants to combat terrorism and should fight in a targeted way so as to avoid unnecessary shedding of civilian victims. And that's what we talked about with Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Herzog and the other senior people I met in the region. And France decided, together with Jordan and Egypt, to send out some extra means, Tonnerre ship, and the French militaries are getting ready to adapt to the conditions of the crisis, but we are sending equipment and humanitarian supplies, which have already arrived in Egypt. And we also sent the military ship that will be getting there on the coast of Gaza to bring support. We are building a humanitarian coalition with other European countries, particularly Cyprus, which is the backstop for the aid. And we're also working in close links with Greece and all European partners who want to join in this concrete response. So humanitarian aid, which we think is essential to protect the most fragile populations, as well as to try and bring our hostages home. And this has to be coordinated concerning the people of Gaza, but also concerning West Bank populations. We want to bring some support to them too, because of the blockade under which they are suffering. And would like to ask the Israeli to stop the violence against those civilian populations. Third pillar, the political perspective. We need to relaunch talks to find a solution with two states to satisfy both sides, and this would include the Americans, our partners in that region. And all European partners share these priorities. Of course, there are different perceptions, but we've managed to converge on a joint statement and answer some of the concrete questions that these ideas beg. And we want fighting against terrorism and humanitarian support and finding a political solution to be a global answer to the problems in order to try and avoid escalation. I think we're doing our duty in this. This is it. If you have any questions. Mr. President, France Press Agency, you said since the beginning, and you repeated, that Israel was allowed to defend themselves in the respect of international law. Do you think that what they are doing now, the strikes and the first ground incursions, correspond to those criteria of the humanitarian and international law? As we said, we recognize their right to fight against terrorism, but we also consider that the complete blockade and the indiscriminate bombing, the massive ground actions are not at all appropriate for protecting civilian populations. This is why we would like the initiative to be well prepared so that it's targeted against terrorists. And we could even cooperate. It's not just words. We think just now a humanitarian ceasefire is what we need for all those civilian population who have been hit to get relief, and for the agencies of the United Nations who have lost dozens of their staff, who are doctors, teachers, people who were there to support the populations, and they are dying under the bombs. And we can't pretend this isn't existing. And that is nothing to do with anti-terrorism. So some concerted humanitarian action and targeted action would be much better. And I think it's consistent with what we've been saying since the beginning. Florent Tardif of CNews Net Plus. In the press release of last night, the European Union asked for pauses so that the humanitarian aid, as you said, against what Israel is doing, which is purely military. So these breaks, these pauses, would allow to bring in relief. A humanitarian corridor would be set up. How can it be done? First, I think we have to be lucid. We're in a situation which is a war, and that war is going to last, because fighting Hamas cannot be done overnight. And tensions are growing on both sides. Then, if we're fighting terrorist groups and fighting a war against them, right from the beginning, it has to be separated from civilian populations. Otherwise, everything's going to flare up, and there is confusion in the minds. and that is against Israel's security. If millions of people in the region consider that their brothers and sisters are killed because of Hamas, they're going to join the cause. And we really must do what we can against this. And I don't know about the debate whether we need a pause or some pauses. It's a useless debate. I think the main thing is that we need to solve the basic problems, such as the problem of hospitals. It's a very complex matter. Quite clearly, the thing is that Hamas is a terrorist organization, and they did something very barbaric. But within Gaza, they're very well organized. They are sophisticated. They have tunnels and a system of interdependence of their resources and the civilian population. So when you talk to the Israelis and you say, why don't you switch on the electricity? Because it gives it to them too. It's very difficult for the Israeli authorities to carry out this fight to eradicate Hamas. But it needs time. The right conditions have to be made, such as hospitals being plugged onto a different electrical line and other countries getting involved. So we need this break in this ceasefire so that the whole civilian population doesn't become victim of the anti-terrorist action. We also need the humanitarian corridors to be opened. We really need those breaks. One or two more questions. From Arte, as regards Ukraine and Viktor Orban, who came yesterday to Brussels to say that he was a European but he shook hands with Putin last week and held a speech on Monday where he compared Brussels to the Moscow of the Soviet Union. And what can you do against Orban? Can you tell him to stop? Is it? Have you sent out any warnings to Fico, his colleague in Slovenia? Well, I think the European spirit. Just a minute, I'll come back to your question. Very often in Viktor Orban's speeches, he compares Brussels and Moscow, and I've said before, quite solemnly, there's a basic difference. Brussels never invaded another country, didn't invade Hungary. They decided to join Europe. They got a lot of advantage from it since it's been member, and the Hungarians live better since they've been in Europe, and this is their sovereign choice. So let's not confuse a sovereign choice. We have all decided to join Europe and therefore delegating some of our sovereignty to Europe. So you cannot mix up military domination and a sovereign choice. That's very serious to maintain that confusion. What I said to Viktor Orban, I said it officially, I can tell you. First, heads of state or of government have a sovereign position. You cannot forbid one of them to see somebody else, to meet another of our leaders. However, I think there should be an upstream and downstream coordination, and in the situation in which we are vis-à-vis Russia, you can't use your bilateral contacts to weaken Europe's position and just promote your own. I cannot give any prime minister, including Orban, lessons about what he needs to do. I suppose it's useful at some point for him. And I think since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, we were united, rapid, and stuck to our line. and the Prime Minister of Hungary and of Slovakia didn't ask for any change of the European text, although they feel differently. But they don't throw spokes into the continuity of our action. So let's listen to the arguments of other people. All arguments can be mentioned, but we need to stick to what we're committed to.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. C'est la Bougriou pour TF1 LCI.
TF1 LCI. The question of the Middle East. The prefect of Paris said that the pro-Palestinian demo would be forbidden tomorrow, but it isn't the same in other European capitals. So are we blowing onto the fire here in France compared to other countries? I trust the competent préfet to make the right decision. Let me say that several of the demonstrations were authorized because it was Palestinian cause for peace. Others were forbidden when it was ambiguous, when the intention was more rather to support Hamas. The decisions are taken case by case, and in each case, a judge is asked to decide, and the decision of the prefect was certainly done taking into account what he needs to know. And there was another demo for peace in Palestine that was held a few days ago. Every time the judge has to decide whether the case is a good one or what he decides. So quite solemnly, I would like to say, we are the country of Europe that has the biggest Jewish community. We are the country of Europe that has the biggest Arab Muslim population too. It's very difficult to leave the voices of the two extremes be on the forefront of our public life because it leads to division. I am for talks and discussion and for both sides to express themselves and in order to build something, and we need to maintain our unity. Last question.
Bonjour, Jacques Grandin de l'Opinion. Une question sur le cadre
somebody from Opinion, the pluriannual financial plan. What do you think about the proposals of the Commission? Are they going to benefit the European functionaries, or are they going to help the people? I think the priorities defined by the European Commission and the presidents are the right ones, and we're including more support to Ukraine, and the amounts suggested seem to us very high, and we asked for a slightly lower figure because there are priorities, and we don't want other priorities to be sacrificed. I don't want to get into the details of our debate, but clearly, in various countries, we are going through hard times and trying to overcome our economic difficulties. But I don't think this in a small increase is going to make a big difference. Just one more person. Yes. I have to. Swissblick, on your maritime humanitarian corridor, what would the form be? Would it be a floating bridge? What would it be? Can you give us more details? There was a proposal by Spain. A second question, France Télévisions Brussels. You said that the conflict would last. Are you afraid that there might be a migratory crisis as a result, such as in 2015? And the President of the Parliament said so, and the connections between the immigrants and terrorism might be a cause of concern. On the first question, the maritime corridors, the idea was to send by sea and air, medical supplies and relief supplies. And afterwards, we're going to organize with the agreement of the Israeli authorities, the United Nations and Egypt, a way to provide a humanitarian relief on the ground, possibly along the coast. And Cyprus being the closest, we could use them as a bridgehead and send in a faster way the needed supplies. And this is going to be defined as we go along, as we work on it. We have contacts with the Israeli authorities so as to work out where the transit points could be, and using Navy if need be in order to be more efficient. And thank you to the President of Cyprus for his commitment to this. As regards the peace conference, yes, we must try and relaunch it now. It's very difficult, of course, to be doing this while you have an ongoing fight against Hamas, but it's still necessary. And fighting Hamas is not against the Palestinian authorities, of course. We have a triptych which we defined since the beginning. We want to fight the terrorist groups. We want to also provide a political answer, and you can't do one without the other. Otherwise, people resent it. And as they've been saying for a long time in Palestine, you're not giving us any proper answers, and it leads to the most violent reactions. So the relaunching of the peace talks would be good for both sides. We need to convince our Israeli partners that this would be the best for them too. We are working very hard at this. As regards your other questions, I do think that the conflict is probably going to last, I don't know in what form, and expand on scenarios, but it could have migratory consequences. But it's rather early to say so. It depends how it spreads. And on our humanitarian action, it would have very grave consequences if it went that way. It's something we have to prepare and anticipate collectively. As regards immigration and terrorism, I'm not sure there's a link. You can't shorten it to that. We are cooperating within Schengen to combat terrorism. There's no direct existential link, but there are people with terrorist projects who come in as immigrants. And so you must keep a balance and not be generalizing nor denying that it exists. You remember the Nice attempt. It was a Tunisian who came through Italy and came into France and then committed his attack. So we want to improve our cooperation at the borders, and it's part of the system that we're working upon and that we very recently talked about finalizing. You heard about all the technicalities of it recently. When people arrive on our territory, we try and be as professional as possible and have a way of detecting the more dangerous individuals. And we've got a good internal cooperation between countries to dismantle the networks. So this is what I can say to that. And we are very vigilant. For my part, I would like my Minister of the Interior to coordinate with all his colleagues so that we continue to cooperate at European level. Thank you. I need to go back to Paris.